Okay, welcome to the seventh episode of American Spirits. I am joined today, as usual, by the co host, Ryan Turnipseed. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
My refrigerator might need some repairs, but, doing fine. And we have Mr. Auberon Quinn back with us. Thank you for joining. How have you been?
My pleasure. It is. I am well rested and ready to bring the pain.
Yes, well, very good, because today we are, of course, discussing the 47-page pamphlet Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I think the edition we read actually has more than that because it was published later with several appendices. But of course, it was originally published just before the American Revolution, basically advocating for exactly that, independence from Great Britain. So this is a significant piece of our cultural history, and it's definitely worth being familiar with. So, Common Sense. Ryan, I think you had something particular you wanted to open with before we actually get into this
Yeah,
about Mr.
it's
Paine's religious background.
yes, yeah. People, especially in our side of things, would probably be aware of Paine as being sympathetic to the French Revolution, at least for a time, and being somewhat close to atheism. In fact, I think most people would probably guess he was an atheist, but that would be wrong. By most accounts, it appears that Thomas Paine is a deist. Most of us probably wouldn't see much difference in that, but it is a stark difference between a God-hating atheist and a deist, because especially if you assume that Paine is an atheist, his appeals to God, Scripture, and whatnot else come off as hollow, if not manipulative. Whereas if he's a deist, he's extremely aberrant, and only somewhat mildly suspect in that regard. But he is not using Christianity as like a manipulative rhetorical tool. This is something he actually does believe, and then just as a matter of good historical detail, I think it would be incorrect to characterize him as an atheist. Deism I think is a more accurate description. So that was a little bit of a biography that I feel like might help our audience.
And by way of further context, who was paying Mr. Paine to write this pamphlet?
So I actually looked this up right before we started. He refused to accept profits for it, but it was coordinated with the Continental Army and the Continental Congress. The Paine was writing Common Sense and his other essays, the American Crisis, which we are not covering today. Um, both of these were written to bolster morale for the American soldiers and the American populace. So it's also worth keeping in mind that Paine is not just some niche figure that historians have plucked out because he fit a narrative. He was very much on side and coordinated to be with the American forces.
And on that, the time period when this was written, it was 1776. So this was after Lexington and Concord. And I believe it also came out after Bunker Hill. So by this point, the lead was flying.
Yes, yeah, right. This is wartime pamphleteering. I think would be a good description.
Perfect. So, well, let's get into it. Uh, whose content do we want to look at first? I believe, Ryan, you have the earliest screenshot from the book's text, basically right at the beginning of the origin and design of government. Would you
Yes.
like to have that brought up? Excellent. Let's
Yeah.
bring that one up.
Yeah, so this would be Common Sense 1 for my group. And I'll read this out because I think it's important, and it's a short pamphlet, so we can read from it. Um, Thomas Paine, like most Enlightenment writers, tries to start from the very beginning, which is where does society and the government come from? If you're a political philosopher, and he says that some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections, the latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last a punisher. So this is I immediately thought this was important for a variety of reasons. If you sort of simplified this and sort of tweeted it out, I have a feeling many people would attack this as being extremely modern and aberrantly libertarian. But this was accepted thought for a lot of the Americans at the time of the war. It's also very conservative in a more traditionalist way. So this is sort of like the historical aspect that at least many conservatives still hold to, that the purpose of the government is to sort of restrain vice. It's a very unobjectionable statement, at least one of the purposes, and that society is itself cooperative. That trends more towards liberalism. The society is cooperative, but I figured that this would be good to point out is that Paine is not an anarchist or a radical liberal, at least yet, while writing. He has a distinct role for the government, which is to restrain vice, which is a theme that we've been discussing a lot, especially with Mr. Quinn and the Albion Siege stream. So I thought this was important.
Of course, the fact you're characterizing it as conservative in 2025 itself speaks volumes of the relative uselessness of the conservative progressive distinction, especially when we're casting it back this far, because this sentiment that government is a negative influence, negative in the sense of restraint, not negative in the sense of bad, is revolutionary in the period. This is a understanding of government that would be completely alien to the medievals, for instance. But here you see it taking form right at the outset of the American project, or at least the political beginnings of the American project as an independent nation.
Right, and it shouldn't be confused with any sort of modern characterizations either, because this was also a main driver behind the movement for Republican virtue, is what most historians would call it, or some variant of virtue in the Republic, where the idea was that the Americans could only have a republic if the people were virtuous, that could be helped along by the government, not trying to positively force virtue, but rather to restrain vice. You could argue that's a meaningless distinction, but certainly the people at the time did not think so. So this is something that's we don't really see anymore. You don't hear politicians, media personalities, and whatnot else talking about the need to promote virtue and restrain vice, but this was at the foundation of the country.
One suspects that Paine might even have considered government to be a necessary evil.
Yeah, I mean, he basically says as much. In fact, he continues, society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one, for when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. And this is why I include that in the first screenshot, is that once again Paine is not he's not an anarchist, but he is very realistic in that, like most people here, we've all probably posted some sort of meme similar to this. You know,
Ronald Reagan .mp3.
Oh, well, I was going to go in a different direction. I was going to say we probably posted the memes. I believe there's even a Stone Toss comic that says this is the price we pay for a civilized society. This is how I read that paragraph. If we are supposed to have a government to maintain order, but the government is preventing order from arising, it's worse than useless, and something should be done. I feel like that's perhaps a sympathetic call to action for the modern day that Paine just starts out with in the second paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Quite ironically, also very applicable to the former parent of America, Great Britain, at this very moment in time, as much as it's also applicable to our own government now. So, sort of a double irony there.
Yeah. So that was that was specifically why I took the first two paragraphs. So they establish Paine's ideology. It's modern, but it's not contemporary. So this is be very careful trying to fit Paine into current ideological groups.
Yes, that's always a mistake I think we've emphasized that a few times when looking back historically. I think again in Albion Seed we talked about we used the word progressive in a few places, but it's important to remember that this is simply a well, we might say a necessary evil in terms of understanding because this is the framework our minds operate in, but we can't read too deeply into that. So I think you basically screenshot like the paragraph right after this, right? In Common Sense, screenshot number 2.
Yeah, yeah. So if we go to number 2, I can read this out just because it sort of draws more on what's the foundation that Payne is drawing on. He says, "Here then is the origin and rise of government, namely a mode rendered necessary by the inability of moral virtue to govern the world. Here too is the design and end of government, vis-a-vis freedom and security. And however our eyes may be dazzled with show or our ears deceived by sound, however prejudice may warp our wills or interest darken our understanding, the simple voice of nature and reason will say 'tis right. I draw my idea of the form of government from a principle in nature which no art can overturn, vis-a-vis the more simple anything is, the less liable it is to be disordered, and the easier repaired when disordered, and the easier repaired when disordered. And with this maxim in view, I offer a few remarks on the so much boasted Constitution of England." And he'll go on, and we'll get to that in a moment. But this is a very I'm not going to say basic because that implies that thought didn't go into this, but this is a very forcefully articulated American pragmatism. This is a clear form of government. This is why it exists and why we need it. And the simpler it is, the better. The easier it is to fix, the less likely it is to err. He's being extremely pragmatic here, and he's open about it. You don't see political philosophers from many other places, if at all, include this practicality in their reasoning for why the government should exist the way it is.
All right. Well, I believe the next thing we have available is screenshot 13. I think Auberon Quinn on the cause of America. You had highlighted this.
Indeed, this it's a little early to start banging on Payne, but I did want to bring this to the attention of our audience. He says in the introduction, I believe this is the second or third paragraph of the pamphlet, "The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. Many circumstances have and will arise which are not local, but universal, and through which principles of all lovers of mankind are affected, and in the event of which their affections are interested. The laying a country desolate with fire and sword, declaring war against the natural rights of all mankind, and extirpating the defenders thereof from the face of the earth, is the concern of every man to whom nature hath given the power of feeling, of which class, regardless of party censure, is." So here we have an early manifestation of what would eventually become this universalist tendency, which has so afflicted America in modern times, in which some of our European cousins have, with some justice, pointed as a problem in America's foundation. This conceit that all mankind shares the American struggle and that all mankind yearns to live in the American mode is something which we see from the very beginning.
Right. And this is worth pointing out, though. And he makes this clearer throughout the pamphlet. Thomas Paine conceives of America as a specific people. He just also intertwines it with these universalist declarations, which
Indeed, it's one of the principal tensions is in the work is the pains which Paine takes to make America out as a separate and distinct thing from Europe, but at the same time he feels this need to involve Europe in the American struggle, and indeed all of mankind in the American struggle. Now, I think some of that can be attributed to the political realities of 1776, when the cause of the American Revolution very much depended on the favorable feeling of France and Spain. So that might be part of why we're seeing this appeal, but it's there nonetheless.
It's also this is also something to calm down anyone that might have been worried about seceding or declaring independence, rather. Because there was a heavy loyalist contingency in the colonies, and they are Thomas Paine's greatest enemy, and he makes that very clear in basically all of his works. Any compromiser, loyalist, or moderate is going to be the worst group in terms of harm done to the country and the people. So
reconciliationists.
yeah, right, exactly. So anything that you can use to say that this is a justified conflict in totality is going to be politically useful. And this is also why in that first statement as well, something that's sort of lost, a lot of the defenders of the monarchy would point at the things that Thomas Paine calls, sensory, things that dazzle the eyes and whatnot. When Paine is being very practical in a very American way, he's trying to cut past a lot of the propaganda and rhetoric that reconcilers, moderates, and loyalists would use to try to justify the British ruling the Americans. So this is something to keep in mind. None of that is to detract from the fact that he is appealing to universalist ideologies here. It's just to keep in mind that he's not exactly a how would I put it, a modern American conservative.
Indeed. Well, with that, we've actually both highlighted the next thing. We'll use mine because I like the style better. So number 19, going to ye old pamphlet-looking style. Absolute governments, though the disgrace of human nature, have this advantage with them. They are simple. If the people suffer, they know the head from which their suffering springs, know likewise the remedy, and are not bewildered by a variety of causes and cures. But the constitution of England is so exceedingly complex that the nation may suffer for years together without being able to discover in which part the fault lies. Some will say in one, and some will say in another, and every political physician will advise a different medicine. End quote. So yeah, both you and I picked that one out. Was this what you were referring to when you referenced this idea of formalism earlier?
Yeah, because this is another example where we can find things that a lot of us found to be intriguing from blogs from the 2000s, written by people who didn't really have our interests at heart. We can find the exact same concepts from our own people. This is something that I've found interesting the more I read from these things.
It is freighted with irony, though, because, of course, he makes this statement about the virtue of absolute governments being simple, but then he goes on in the pamphlet to propose this abstruse method of continental government, wherein each state elects a convention, and each convention then elects a conference, and there's all these layers of representatives, which is quite complex. Viewed in total, and of course that would be mirrored both in the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, so that today we're in the situation where, again, we can yell about Trump or we can yell about Biden, but ultimately decisions are made by managers so many levels down that no one really knows what head their woes and suffering spring from.
Yeah, that's a very clear contradiction, which if you, the audience member, go and read this pamphlet, something that we, the people here on the podcast, probably won't emphasize as much that is in the pamphlet a lot is Thomas Paine's criticisms of monarchy in favor of republicanism, just because we likewise find those to be somewhat contradictory, or at least false. So this is a work that you definitely have to find good things in. Not to say it's obviously bad, but I don't think we subscribe fully to common sense.
And speaking of things that we will gloss over, we are lamentably pulling here from the first edition of Common Sense. But if you read the second edition of Common Sense, there is an absolutely glorious demonstration of autism in which Thomas Paine argues that the United States could have a larger navy than Britain, and goes through to discuss the cost of every 18th century warship and all their equipment and all the crew requirements. It's quite something.
Well, the screenshot I have is actually from the second edition.
Oh, do you have the ship charts?
Yeah, I didn't screenshot them, but that's what we're looking at right now. I had that edition. It was definitely interesting, but not really particularly
Clausington will appreciate it.
Yeah, maybe we can give it to him and see where he takes it. So yeah, why don't we go back to Ryan's screenshots, Common Sense 4, where he's talking about the English Constitution in a little more detail. So you take it away.
Yeah. So Thomas Paine writes, some writers have explained the English Constitution thus: the king, they say, is one, the people another. The peers are a house in behalf of the king, the commons in behalf of the people. But this hath all the distinctions of a house divided against itself. And though the expressions be pleasantly arranged, yet when examined they appear idle and ambiguous. And it will always happen that the nicest construction that words are capable of, when applied to the description of something which either cannot exist or is too incomprehensible to be within the compass of description, will be words of sound only, and though they may amuse the ear, they cannot inform the mind. For this explanation includes a previous question: how came the king by a power which the people are afraid to trust and always obliged to check? Such a power could not be the gift of a wise people, neither can any power which needs checking be from God. Yet the provision which the Constitution makes supposes such a power to exist. So this is a strong claim from him that I don't really want to defend in totality, but it is a very interesting criticism of a government of checks and balances. He provides and it's a very basic one too. If the government of checks and balances is good, then why should we check it? Like, there's a fear behind it. That's the motivation behind checking power. It provides a very interesting contradiction for a lot of modern constitutional scholars, conservatives, liberals, and whatnot else back in 1776.
It's an impressive piece of rhetorical judo, but again, when he goes on to propose his own form of government for the continent, he includes this elaborate system of checks and balances. So, what really are we to draw with this vis-a-vis the sincerity of the criticism?
Yeah, that is a good question. Just because I was less inclined to take seriously his governmental propositions. Whereas this one, I see the logic behind it. And if I was to level a criticism of this book, it's his deliberations on what form of American government should take seem to arise out of nowhere and don't really seem to be founded upon much. Whereas this, I would say, actually has an interesting argument behind it. It's an internal argument. So if you accept the idea that powers need to be checked because too much power is bad, scary, or whatever else, he points out the contradiction between those two statements.
Right now, it would actually be worth bringing up. If you recall, the Old Glory Club conference in 2024, I gave a speech that involved the separation of powers and some particular books I read to study the history of that topic in England. And it's just worth noting here that the concepts of checks and balances and separation of powers are often confused as basically being the same thing, but they're not the same thing at all and have very different intellectual histories behind them. Checks and balances is particularly problematic, partially in the way he's describing here, but also the way, for example, we have this current issue with the Supreme Court checking the power of the executive. This is different than the concept of separation of powers in of itself, which doesn't necessarily involve this concept of the powers interfering in each other's separate domains. So it's just worth pointing that out because this is a really important part of Anglo-American political theory. These two theories of checks and balances and separation of powers, they have very different histories, and they're not really related at all.
Yeah, furthermore, just historically, maybe dishonest is too strong a word, but his account of the English Constitution is not really historically correct. The king is one, the people another, the peers are a house on behalf of the king. Right there, that is absolutely not true. The peers were a house in opposition to the king. This is why they had to put a sword to King John's throat at Runnymede to get the Magna Carta signed and Parliament introduced later on, because the nobles had a different interest than the king and were in opposition to them. And so we see that the reason that we have this historical evolution of checks and balances and separations of powers, these being different things, as you pointed out, Charlie. It arises from the organic realities of power over time. The nobles had guys with swords who answered to them. The king had fewer guys with swords that answered to him, and so compromises had to be made. And it is this organic way in which the English Constitution arose. And Paine just kind of glosses over this as if a bunch of Enlightenment philosophers came together and said, this is the system we're going to design.
Well, in fairness to him, though, if I remember correctly, I believe the House of Lords was strongly aligned with the king at this point in time.
At this point in time, yes, but that's
right.
not the historical account of how these institutions came to be.
Right, but it's not entirely clear to me that he is saying that this is always the case, but rather this is the case when it's important, which for him would be America and independence, which is this is something that I find interesting, because a lot of people, like Charlie said, confuse checks and balances with the separation of powers, but because they justify separating powers with checks and balances, they kind of make the argument for separating powers to be idiotic and contradictory, when in actuality it's a part of our history, which is why later on Paine does divide powers, but I don't believe he really argues as strongly for checks and balances as much as he does just for specifying which group has which powers. But perhaps
this reflects the reality that power is unevenly divided in society. It's not like you can just impose a power structure on a society. Societies have organic distributions of power that have to be accommodated.
Well, let's move on to the next one, Common Sense 5, which gets into some biblical references. Again, this is one of yours, Ryan, if you want to go ahead and read it.
Yes, Thomas Paine writes, as the exalting one man so greatly above the rest cannot be justified on the equal rights of nature, so neither can it be defended on the authority of Scripture, for the will of the Almighty, as declared by Gideon and the prophet Samuel, expressly disapproves of government of kings. All anti-monarchical parts of Scripture have been very smoothly glossed over in monarchical governments, but they undoubtedly merit the attention of countries which have their governments yet to form. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, is the Scripture doctrine of courts. Yet it is no support of monarchical government, for the Jews at the time were without a king and in a state of vassalage to the Romans. Near 3,000 years passed away from the Mosaic account of the creation till the Jews under a national delusion requested a king. Till then, their form of government, except in extraordinary cases where the Almighty interposed, was a kind of republic administered by a judge and the elders of the tribes. Kings they had none, and it was held sinful to acknowledge any being under that title but the Lord of hosts. And when a man seriously reflects on the idolatrous homage which is paid to the persons of kings, he need not wonder that the Almighty, ever jealous of his honor, should disapprove a form of government which so impiously invades the prerogative of heaven. Monarchy is ranked in Scripture as one of the sins of the Jews, for which a curse and reserve is denounced against them. The history of that transaction is worth attending to. So the reason that I screenshotted this and brought it here is not because this is like a orthodox line of Scripture or a party line from the OGC or anything like that. I thought this was interesting for 2 points. Number one, Paine is familiar with the Bible. He does know what he's talking about at the very basic level of details. The second reason that I found this to be interesting is because it sort of exposes how the word republic has changed, because Paine was not really describing an elective form of government there, but rather he's using a much more classical definition of a republic, which is a system other than a monarchy, which does not necessarily have to have elections or whatnot else. So those were 2 points that I thought were worth bringing up. The other thing that I find interesting, though, is that you do hear render unto Caesar very often today by most denominations, and it's almost always in defense of something terrible that the American government, NGOs, or NATO, or whatever else has done. So I do not really agree with his conclusion here that monarchy is necessarily anti-scriptural. However, I'm deeply sympathetic to what he is trying to get at here, which is it's not necessarily about I don't know, maybe he'd argue it differently, but the way I took this was that it's not necessarily about the Orthodox Christian line on this, but rather it's definitely worth pointing out that Scripture gets abused by power. That's a very common line of thought. And it still is to this day with basically the exact same justifications. It's just now we don't have the monarchy and we still get the same justifications.
Yeah, funny how that works.
All right. Well, yeah, that was very useful to look at. Let's move on to common sense number 6.
Yeah, sorry, I have to pull it up here. Okay, all right, and then this one's much shorter. England since the conquest hath known some few good monarchs, but groaned beneath a much larger number of bad ones. Yet no man in his senses can say that their claim under William the Conqueror is a very honourable one. A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally origin. It certainly hath no divinity in it. However, it is needless to spend much time in exposing the folly of hereditary right. If there are any so weak as to believe it, let them promiscuously worship the ass and the lion, and welcome. I shall neither copy their humility nor disturb their devotion. So this is in a section in Common Sense for context where Paine is arguing that hereditary right is necessarily wrong. I'm less interested in that. What I am interested in here, though, is we have had online thinkers try to talk about restoring British monarchical rule because of sort of hollow appeals given the people arguing for it to divine right, historicity, a much more the government form has much more decorum. There's more order involved in it. It's more divine. I feel like Paine. This is not what we would say is a fair view, but it does poke holes in what a lot of people who might have called themselves Jacobites or whatnot else a few years ago would have been claiming. That if you do want to restore the English, you should at least be honest enough to say it's not perfectly glamorous, nor is it entirely cut and dry. The English line, the rulership, and whatnot else is definitely the legitimate rulers, especially here, if not in England.
Yes, Jacobite, you might say reactionary. I would have called myself reactionary at some point, although I would not use that term anymore because it does imply this sort of fruitless pining for a idealized version of a past form, and it's simply not a practical or really forward-looking way of approaching politics. So, my personal opinion is that if people are still calling themselves reactionaries, well, you should basically stop doing that because it's really just sort of detaches you from the practical realities of where we are and where we're going. And that's a big problem with this, idea. I think you're alluding to the idea of restoring the Stuarts or something ridiculous like that.
Or any monarchy, really.
Any monarch.
I find a lot of the arguments, if the people would just say, I want a monarchy and this is my preferred thing, and it doesn't go as far beyond that, like, I can't really argue against it. There's nothing objectionable there, but I have been party to a lot of rhetorical justifications, which I think are more rhetoric than substance. This was sort of a very nice reality check, and when I read it, I just thought this is I sort of wish I could have written like that when that was the bigger thing.
Notwithstanding that the Stuarts are the rightful house of England, as we shall see, America is not England. We are a separate and different thing, where the Stuarts or any other of the old world houses, except possibly the House of Habsburg, have any purchase.
Yeah,
Very
and this
true.
is like most things here, Paine is anti-monarchical, but I don't really care about that as much. I just thought this was perhaps a good reality check for anyone still hanging on to ideologies like that.
Yes, in general, we're not in general. The OGC is very much built anti-ideologically. We highly encourage you to purge ideology from your brain, and yeah, if you're having arguments about whether or not monarchies should be restored in Europe in any serious way, this is entirely impractical and has nothing to do with reality, and is just coming from your ideological delusions. Anyway, let's move on to Common Sense 7.
Yeah, this one's fun. I'll just read it, and you guys let me know what group of people immediately comes to your mind. So, Payne writes, "It hath been reported of the late Mr. Pelham, who, though an able minister, was not without his faults, that on his being attacked in the House of Commons on the score that his measures were only a temporary kind, replied, 'They will last my time.' Should a thought so fatal and unmanly possess the colonies in the present contest, the name of ancestors will be remembered by future generations with detestation." So I'll pause there. Like, does that sound like anything that we might be arguing about today? This mindset that it's good enough for this one generation, but everyone else is left to deal with the consequences. It's seems to be a perennial problem.
After me, the flood.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. So
I'm not gonna explicitly name what you're saying there because
Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone
right.
knows who you're talking
it's
about.
too obvious.
Yes.
So this is I find this extremely interesting because I think I would definitely say that the younger people now probably have it worst of all just by sheer number. Um, it is interesting that this is almost cyclical because you don't see many complaints like this early on in the Republic until about the time of the Civil War, and then you don't see it again until about the time of the World Wars, and then you proceed. You don't really see it again until about the 2000s. It's an interesting cycle that I see.
Well, it's actually a white pill when you examine it, because yes, you have these generations that only care what happens during their lifetimes, but they are, or at least have to this point, invariably been followed by the generations, such as the revolutionary generation that Payne is talking to here, taking the bull by the horns and actually solving the problems and establishing something for their posterity.
Yeah, right. That was and that's the other thing that's worth pointing out is that there's a few things more radicalizing than here. They will last my time, and you are not in that generation. So this is perhaps something good if indeed we do work in cycles, or if the same things push us towards something that look like a cycle. Perhaps we too will sweep away people that have come before us and said that the measures will last their time.
You have it straight from Thomas Paine. We are going to make it.
Yeah. So and I don't really think I need to read the rest on here. But this is because he goes on to basically just say that they will be swept away and we will build something better. That's
Well,
what the
actually,
rest of
there
that
is one
says.
thing in the second paragraph that that is a theme I want to hit on later, which is where he says, "The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe." And this is a theme we're going to see recur in this pamphlet, is that Thomas Paine is thinking about America as a continent. From its inception, his mental conception of America is this continent spanning polity that will fill all of North America.
Right. A very important idea for Americans.
Yes.
And I do believe that's what we discussed last week, actually.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about that, you can go rewatch or watch for the first time the episode last week.
All right, let's look at number 38 now. One of my screenshots, or might have been one of Quinn's. I have them in the same grouping. But yeah, 38. This is actually right before one of yours, Ryan. So we'll jump to that one next. Quote: "I have heard it asserted by some that as America has flourished under her former connection with Great Britain, the same connection is necessary toward her future happiness and will always have the same effect. Nothing can be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We may as well assert that because a child has thrived upon milk, that it is never to have meat, or that the first 20 years of our lives is to become precedent for the next 20. But even this is admitting more than is true, for I answer roundly that America would have flourished as much and probably much more had no European power taken any notice of her. The commerce by which she hath enriched herself are the necessaries of life, and will always have a market, while eating is the custom of Europe. Yeah, so basically the point being made there, I can disagree with him on European powers not taking notice of her. Obviously, America could not have thrived if our British the place, but the fact that America thrived while as a colony of British and European powers at some point, the fact it certainly doesn't need to remain that way in perpetuity. And we can certainly apply that exact sort of logic to our current government and whatever form it takes, if we still want to call it a constitutional government or not. The point is that because something is governed the way it is now, that doesn't mean that it will always be suitable for it to be that governed that way perpetually.
Indeed, and he goes further than that. He says that America would actually have been even stronger, would have flourished more if the Europeans and England in particular had not interfered. And we saw evidence of this last week in your wonderful discussion with the Prudentialist, Frederick Jackson Turner. We saw how England was forever trying to restrain the westward expansion, was always trying to keep the Indians in their space so that they could continue to provide furs, and then we're always putting a choke chain on the American drive to the west. And that is the sort of thing you would expect to see if Mr. Paine's claims had merit to them.
Right, and there's also something else that I suspect we will discuss at some point in the future, which is that this is a line of arguing that will persist in the United States and for the American people all the way up into the modern day with people that have been labeled isolationists, because all the strongest arguments from that group is always that we get involved with great powers, Europeans and whatnot else, and it just ends up making us poorer. We lose men for things that don't help us or the people or the country. This is a line of thought that persists in the United States to this day among the American people in particular.
So actually, before we get to yours, number 39 is actually next in the text, so we will read that. So 39, quote, "Alas, we have been long led away by ancient prejudices and made large sacrifices to superstition. We have boasted the protection of Great Britain without considering that her motive was interest, not attachment, and that she did not protect us from our enemies on our account, but from her enemies on her own account, from those who had no quarrel with us on any other account, and who will always be our enemies on the same account. Let Britain waive her pretensions to the continent, or the continent throw off the dependence, and we should be at peace with France and Spain, were they at war with Britain. The miseries of Hanover last war ought to warn us against connections." This is pretty interesting because this is sort of what Britain did, not even sort of. I mean, in the 19th century, the British in particular sought to keep the Americans out of Europe, particularly from allying with any powers, especially France or anyone else who might be at war with Britain. So this was a big concern coming in the other direction. And yeah, I mean, the point is quite clear. There's this idea that Great Britain loves us or something, and that's why we're under her protection. The United States was always exploited by Great Britain as a colony, just like Britain's other colonies. Much like we today are not under the loving embrace of the American government, and that's why Americans are involved in all these wars in faraway places, because the government is just trying to protect us and love us so much. It's very much the same condition we find ourselves under. The U.S. government has an interest in utilizing the population to its own material ends, and of course we see this with the mass replacement of the population with a different population that is more pliable to their interests. So
yeah, and just
very applicable.
To reinforce your point, that last remark about the miseries of Hanover references exactly this. Hanover is a small state in Germany. At this time, Germany was not one country, and George III was the third Hanoverian monarch. his grandfather, George III, or George I, was a prince of Hanover, who the British essentially imported to be their king to make sure that a Catholic didn't take the throne. And so for the next 80 years, Britain kind of got subordinated to the foreign policy ends of Hanover. George I and George II were very more interested in German affairs than they were British affairs. And so Britain suffered by being under the rulership of a government which did not have the British people's interests at heart. Now, by the time of George III, the Hanoverians had anglicized to a fair degree. I believe George III was the first Hanoverian who actually spoke English. But it's cautionary when you let a foreigner rule over you. The government gets perverted to interests not your own.
I know what I want to say, but I should not say it.
Well, let's move on to Common Sense 8. It's literally the next paragraph, so I'll give it back to you to read, Ryan.
Yes, so this is continuing. It hath lately been asserted in Parliament that the colonies have no relation to each other but through the parent country, i.e., that Pennsylvania and the Jerseys, and so on for the rest, are sister colonies by the way of England. This is certainly a very roundabout way of proving relationship, but it is the nearest and only true way of proving enmity, or enemyship, if I may so call it. France and Spain never were, nor perhaps ever will be our enemies as Americans, but as our being the subjects of Great Britain. So this is very interesting because Paine has to be distinguishing between people and rulership at this point. The Americans have to be a people. There is no united country really at this point, at least not one that's been around for very long, and nor would it make sense to call it that because once again, there hasn't really been a time for America to be allied or at war with France and Spain. As he's talking about, it's just been colonies under the British, but the people definitely exist as Americans. So this is something that I found to be very relevant for what we're trying to do here on American Spirits. I also find it very interesting as well. He seems to poke fun at this idea, these what probably would have been anti-American, pro-royal Tories in the Parliament, saying that the Americans aren't even really related to each other. They're just only related to England and therefore to each other. He seems to be very skeptical of such a claim. I do believe that Paine has at least a very implicit, if not explicit in certain areas, of a concept that the Americans are a people and related to each other across the eastern seaboard.
Yes, and it's not even an Anglo-centric conception, as we will see. He views America as being the child of Europe, not just Britain.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So this is I think this is important because if we believe what we've been talking about for the last few streams, we do not really fall into the group on the right that says that there is no national identity for Americans. We certainly don't fall into the sort of George Bush, almost neoconservative idea of a national identity, certainly. But we don't really. I don't think we can agree with the members in Parliament or some of our friends on the right that there are only state or local identities, but not a national one.
No, but Paine's whole conception is of America as a continent, and the continent being one people. This is clear throughout Common Sense. Also, just on a prophecy scoreboard basis, Paine is batting 500 here.
All right, let's look at number 40. One of my screenshots actually combined one of my bits and Mr. Quinn's bits. So I will read my part first. Quote, "But Britain is the parent country, say some. Then the more shame upon our conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families. Wherefore the assertion, if true, turns out to be her reproach. But if it happens not to be true, or only partly so, well, I'll stop there. The reason I highlighted that particular bit is just to make the point that we've talked quite a lot about our British, our Anglo heritage, and also our European heritage on the streams, And it is important to make the point, however, that this is a historical matter about our lineage as Americans. And the United States separated cleanly from its European and Anglo uh, line 250 years ago, and had already been developing on its own for 100 years. So, although the ancient culture of Britain and Europe is also within our lineage, we are very much our own culture, and the modern day British people and European peoples have evolved for another several hundred years on their own, and we are not the same civilizations. We have both come from the same, we're branches from the same tree, but we are not the same people. And it's really important to emphasize that, particularly on this show, where we are very much focused on America. And although we sympathize with the very similar metapolitical issues that the British people face and various European peoples face, ultimately these are each our own struggles to overcome. And although there's some metapolitical link between the overall struggle against, let's say, globalism, it really ends at the metapolitical. And when the practical actually comes in, there's very little practical that our different countries have to do with each other. And as is the case emphasized here, Europe and Britain are historic rivals to America. After the separation, the British basically did nothing but subvert the United States for several hundred years, and so that point really has to be made, because although there's certainly some metapolitical, perhaps ideological common cause with Britain in particular, uh, let's say even if people you're sympathetic to came to power in Great Britain, that behavioral pattern would not change. Europe and Britain will always be in opposition to America. This is simply the nature of these two different civilizations. I think last time we mentioned this concept that the American civilization is not the Faustian civilization; it's a separate one. That is our belief here. You can disagree with that, but that is the belief we hold, and it is important to comprehend that the sort of one struggle dynamic idea that people have can only be taken so far, and really can be taken only to a very limited degree in a practical sense. Anyway, that's my soapbox on that. Mr. Quinn, you can read the rest because that was your bit. Unless you want to comment on that, I'm sure you might.
No, my only comment is to echo your sentiments. That's very correct. But to continue, the phrase parent or mother country hath been Jesuitically adopted by the king and his parasites with a low papistical design of gaining an unfair bias on the credulous weakness of our minds. Europe, and not England, is the parent country of America. This new world hath been the asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Hither have they fled, not from the tender embraces of the mother, but from the cruelty of the monster. So here we have this declaration by Paine that America is not merely an English offshoot, but it is an offshoot of all the lovers of liberty, religious and civil, throughout Europe. And by Europe, he means basically Germany, Sweden, and Holland. He's not talking about Serbia. He's not talking about Poland, except maybe Kazimir Pulaski. But it's again a return to this kind of universalist approach that you can easily see how it would be taken a step too far, from being persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty to people coming here for a better life. And that is a universalizing tendency that we must be on guard against as we go forward as Americans, because the seeds of it are very much there early on.
Yes, I entirely agree. And just because people tend to watch podcasts and come away with a one-dimensional view of things, that the podcast viewer, should not take that to mean that Paine has a universalistic view of what an American is. So you, the viewer, should be careful of taking sound bites out of this and writing off your own history.
Indeed.
Yeah, there's also some excellent adverbs and adjectives in there, such as
Oh,
Jesuitically.
spectacular invective. I really need to up my invective game.
All right, so yeah, let's look at Common Sense 9, which again basically continues right after this. We all selected pretty much the opposing paragraphs out of this section. So
It's perfect. All right,
yeah.
so he continues. It is pleasant to observe by what regular gradations we surmount the force of local prejudices, as we enlarge our acquaintance with the world. A man born in any town in England, divided into parishes, will naturally associate most with his fellow parishioners, because their interests, in many cases, will be common, and distinguish him by the name of neighbor. If he meet him but a few miles from home, he drops the narrow idea of a street, and salutes him by the name of townsman. If he travel out of the country and meet him in any other, he forgets the minor divisions of street and town, and calls him countryman, i.e. countyman. But if in their foreign excursions they should associate in France or any other part of Europe, their local remembrance would be enlarged into that of Englishmen. And by a just parity of reasoning, all Europeans meeting in America or any other quarter of the globe are countrymen, for England, Holland, Germany, or Sweden, when compared with the whole, stand in the same places on a larger scale, which the divisions of street, town, and county do on the smaller ones. Distinctions too limited for continental minds. Not 1/3 of the inhabitants, even of this province, Pennsylvania, are of English descent. Wherefore I reprobate the phrase of parent or mother country applied to England only as being false, selfish, narrow, and ungenerous. But admitting that we are all of English descent, what does it amount to? Nothing. Britain, being now an open enemy, extinguishes every other name and title. So this is once again where you can see that he definitely has a very useful and interesting idea for us, but it's about one step away from being turned into a very bad idea. But here he is talking about the famous circle. When he talks about Europe, it means England, Holland, Germany, or Sweden. Um, he once again he has a very distinct idea of who the American people are. It's not only Anglos, though, and even Paine does not deny the immense Anglo influence. In fact, if he were going to, he'd have to give up his entire project of countering the loyalists and reconcilers. It would be a problem that wouldn't exist. Rather, he sees that there is a group of mostly Western Europeans that have settled the American colonies and become American people in that Anglo tradition and framework. So basically, what Charlie has been emphasizing for the last few streams now, as have the rest of us, talking about how America is a broadly European country fitting onto an Anglo skeleton. This is not just something that we have developed. This is something that even Thomas Paine was talking about in the late 18th century.
Right, we Americans have recognized that we are a different people built from the various components of Europe and Britain, but we are very much a distinct people.
Right, and
that
that's
cannot be overemphasized enough if you take away nothing else from these streams.
Right, and that's kind of why I feel like I could definitely see how someone in our audience fairly could take the last part about the English descent meaning nothing because they're worth England. I could easily see how people could think that is subversive, but I don't actually think it is as subversive as it may originally sound, just because the English descent is what we are. But to Thomas Paine's credit, our descent doesn't stop Britain at this point in time from being an open enemy shooting at us and seeking to subjugate us. This is I feel like this is has relevance that I don't want to go too much into right now, where people will say that we are related to this group on the other side of the planet, therefore we must start justifying open conflict over there, send our people over there, or something else. It's very reminiscent of that, but not entirely analogous. That's where my mind jumps to.
Yeah, one of the themes that's been developing is Paine has a way of stopping just short of disaster. He this argument he's making, the declaration of war on Britain has severed all ties of kinship, could just as easily be applied to the Civil War. When the South rose up in arms against the North, did that sever the national tie? Well, we had a whole century of Reconstruction to undo that with arguable success, but it's easy to see how the line of reasoning could be taken too far.
well, as it was specifically.
Yeah,
This was the idea that
yes.
yeah. So that this is important for that. It's just and the main takeaway, especially if you're listening in the audience right now, is that Payne first and foremost views America as a people from the countries that he lists here. This is for all of his faults throughout this pamphlet, of which there are definitely many. We have come a long ways. Um, he has this idea of an American people down to a point where it's second nature to him, which definitely beats us right now because we're having to explain it to everyone that America is a people. To Payne, it's just a foregone conclusion.
Yes, precisely. We are trying to get you, the listener, back to where we already were. This idea that we're having to define America now, what the American people are. It has been long understood what the American people are, and it's only the result of relentless attack that people have forgotten. Now, let's move on to Common Sense 10, which is page 42. Another one of Ryan's.
Yes, so this is Payne. Besides, what have we to do with setting the world at defiance? Our plan is commerce, and that, well attended to, will secure us the peace and friendship of all Europe. Because it is the interest of all Europe to have America a free port, her trade will always be a protection, and her barrenness of gold and silver secure her from invaders. I challenge the warmest advocate for reconciliation to show a single advantage that this continent can reap by being connected with Great Britain. I repeat the challenge, not a single advantage is derived. Our corn will fetch its price in any market in Europe, and our imported goods must be paid for by them where we will. But the injuries and disadvantages that we sustain by that connection are without number, and our duty to mankind at large, as well as to ourselves, instructs us to renounce the alliance, because any submission to, or dependence on, Great Britain tends directly to involve this continent in European wars and quarrels, and sets us at variance with nations who would otherwise seek our friendship, and against whom we have neither anger nor complaint. As Europe is our market for trade, we ought to form no partial connection with any part of it. It is the true interest of America to steer clear of European connections, which she never can do, while by her dependence on Britain she has made the make-weight in the scale of British politics.
Flatly ridiculous. Attachment to Britain would never involve us in European wars.
Well, and if you could believe it, people argued otherwise to this pamphlet. There were numerous response pamphlets that I've read recently, and they sound ridiculous on this point. So, first point, obviously, Mr. Payne is a humanist, so he is once again basing everything on perfectly universal values about mankind. Yet he still comes out with that. You know, to give him credit, he is a liberal humanist for all intents and purposes. I think that's a fair description of maybe not liberal, perhaps a Whig humanist, but he comes out sounding very more towards our side than you'd expect from that foundation.
He uses universalist reasoning to arrive at a particularist conclusion.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know. I don't have an attachment to Payne, but just sort of working that through in my own thought, I feel like he deserves at least a mild amount of credit for not ending up where every other universalist humanist has ended up. But so this I find interesting because he talks about America being a commercial nation, like most Anglo-based nations. It focuses on trade, and that's what its people gravitates towards. But unlike what a lot of people talk about today with America's focus on commerce, he does not make that sort of the purpose of America. It seems rather to be a plan, as he puts it. It's a means. This is how the Americans live. This is not what makes an American. This is something that is I think usually misinterpreted by most mainstream readers of this book, because this is something that they will point to. Where C. Payne is describing here that America is commerce, where if you actually read it, it's a plan, it's a means for people. Who are the people? Well, we've already talked about that. And then he continues to show, given that plan, and it's very American, it's hard to imagine an America without farming and commerce and maritime trade. not, once again, that does not make an American. It's hard to imagine it. He goes on to explain how this puts us at odds fundamentally with Great Britain and her imperial schemes. So that's the importance that I got.
Very good. Let's move on to number 44, going back to one of mine again. Quote, though I would carefully avoid giving unnecessary offense. Well, I don't know about that one. Yet I am inclined to believe that all those who espouse the doctrine of reconciliation may be included with the following descriptions: interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain set of moderate men who think better of the European world than it deserves. And this last class, by an ill-judged deliberation, will be the cause of much more calamities to this continent than all the other three.
Oh, wasn't that the truth?
Yes, it's interesting because that's not the reason why I picked this out, but actually I think here of Woodrow Wilson, who probably fell within that last class of moderate men who thought better of the European world than it deserved, and the abject failure of American involvement in the First World War, particularly after what happened at Versailles. So
no, that's
the
a
point
good
makes
parallel.
itself.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's very true.
What were you thinking?
No, I was just thinking more as a general description of human
Something
types.
general.
You certainly have the what was the term running around a few years ago? Cuckservatives, the moderates and the squishes, who by trying to have both sides of it end up making everything worse.
Yeah, well, that's the reason I actually originally had picked this out, because particularly this concept of interested men. There are so many people who run into our sphere, let's say, who are men with far too much interest in the current regime to allow us to really trust them. That's a big problem. That said, that doesn't mean you can't trust anyone who has some amount of interest in the current regime. I mean, literally everyone does, right? We're
Yeah.
all interested in the current regime, for better or worse, one way or another. So that's a judgment you have to make. But I thought that was an interesting parallel.
The place where my mind went was the sort of cycles we were talking about for the flowering of New England. Because if you look, the place where we get a lot of frankly terrible ideas is from people thinking better of Europe and their universities and bringing them back over here, to the point where we import things like higher criticism for the seminaries. Like, that's not an American idea. We didn't have to have that, but it was a very romanticist generation that thought that Europe was really cool and that America was deficient because it was not Europe.
So yeah, continuing right along with this section of the book, let's go to Common Sense 11. This whole set of pages is really good. So this one's back to Ryan.
Yeah. Men of passive tempers look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Great Britain, and still hoping for the best, are apt to call it out. Come, come, we shall be friends again for all this. But examine the passions and feelings of mankind. Bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land. If you cannot do all these, then you are only deceiving yourselves, and by your delay bringing ruin upon posterity. Your future connection with Britain, whom you can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural, and being formed only on the plan of present convenience, will in a little time fall into a relapse more wretched than the first. But if you say you can still pass the violations over, then I ask, hath your house been burnt? Hath your property been destroyed before your face? Are your wife and children destitute of a bed to lie on, or bread to live on? Have you lost a parent or a child by their hands, and yourself the ruined and wretched survivor? If you have not, then you are not a judge of those who have. But if you have, and you can still shake hands with the murderers, then are you unworthy the name of husband, father, friend, or lover, and whatever may be your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant.
Well, thank goodness he's not causing unnecessary offense.
But this is I love this so much just because I really sympathize with finding the compromisers, conservatives, and the sort of reformist squishes to be the biggest threat. This speaks to me.
100%. I was just going to read this sort of entire section of the book, but we've selected enough of it. This if anything is probably the most hard hitting paragraph in the entire pamphlet. Is this right here? It really speaks to the heart of the heart of people, the problem in people's hearts. It's like, how much are you going to take? How much are you going to take and still pretend like, you know, I mean, basically, the government isn't just completely oriented against us. Like, to the same extent, you know, Great Britain was literally shooting people, right? I mean, it was an actual war. You know, at what point are you going to stop pretending that these people aren't at war with us? You know, and that can be said for European, British, Canadians, Australians, Americans. I mean, literally everyone on the planet who is descended from the Western civilizations.
And note
It's unmanly to simply not recognize the state of affairs.
Absolutely. And note that this is the third time we've seen him couch his argument as an appeal to the fate of our posterity. We have made much in the previous weeks about the question of what is an American. And again, this word posterity comes up. The things the generation of 1776 did, they did not for themselves, but they did for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren and all those who would flow from them. This concept of posterity emerges as ever more central to the idea of what is an American.
That's weird. I didn't know that an idea in an economic zone could have children. Yeah, and this is something else that I think should be emphasized here as well, is that this is not just asking, like, how long are you going to put up with this? What he's really asking is for the people who say they recognize the bad. He's really wanting to know, how long are you going to try to keep justifying half measures before you actually really want to solve the problem? This is something that really is really important. A lot of people need to hear. Is if you actually do think that there is a major problem such that it is harming your children, the people around you, your community, your country, your heritage, and whatnot else, are you going to keep fighting to just restore that to a slightly better position, or are you going to try to fundamentally change it? In Paine's case, that would be breaking off from Britain entirely, this radical idea.
And as we saw, the incorrect answer to that question is, it will last my time. This is very much a call to take the bull by the horns, stop taking half measures, stop bearing up under these insults, and actually correct the problem.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to number 44, going back to one of my screenshots. This is just a short one. "'Tis not in the power of Britain or of Europe to conquer America, if she doth not conquer herself by delay and timidity. The present winter is worth an age if rightly employed, but if lost or neglected, the whole continent will partake of the misfortune. And there is no punishment which that man doth not deserve, be he who or what or where he will, that may be the means of sacrificing a season so precious and useful." Basically, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a point Paine constantly makes, is this time, this moment of history in 1776 is unique. The revolution would not have worked 50 years prior, and it wouldn't work 50 years after. America is at the critical point here where it is capable of taking its own destiny into its hands, and it is a unique moment in history which must be seized. It must be now.
Yes, and I very much believe that we are at the exact place right now. Not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, not 5 years from now. Right now is that exact moment for our time. The common struggle that many people in various countries have been engaged in over the last decade now is the moment to act. And every delay from this point onward is, you know, that future slipping from our grasp. Let's move on. Common Sense 12. This is another of Ryan's, just on the next page.
Yeah, so Paine, once again, I wish I had his ability to write. He writes, "Small islands not capable of protecting themselves are the proper objects for kingdoms to take under their care. But there is something very absurd in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. In no instance hath nature made the satellite larger than its primary planet. And as England and America, with respect to each other, reverses the common order of nature, it is evident they belong to different systems, England to Europe, America to itself. I am not induced by motives of pride, party, or resentment to espouse the doctrine of separation and independence. I am clearly, positively, and conscientiously persuaded that it is the true interest of this continent to be so, but everything short of that is mere patchwork, that it can afford no lasting felicity, that it is leaving the sword to our children and shrinking back at a time when a little more, a little farther would have rendered the continent the glory of the earth. So this is very important for a number of reasons. Once again, that idea of posterity, children from a people, a specific people called the Americans, is something that's being used as a call to action here. Very interesting, once again, for people that think that America is an idea or a doctrine or a creed. And then again, we have this idea that England is separate from America because America is not Europe. It is descended from the Europeans, but it is not Europe. And then something else that I think is important when discussing this here, when he talks about America being beholden to a small island, this satellite being larger than its primary planet, this is I feel like something that's worth talking about here. Because we most certainly are not sovereign in our own country. There are forces that work against the American people night and day. And once again, one does have to wonder how long can nature hold a large satellite around a tiny primary planet?
Are you asking how long can America orbit Qatar?
So,
all right, let's go to number 49. Just a quick one I have. As I have always considered the independency of this continent as an event which sooner or later must arrive, so from the late rapid progress of the continent to maturity, the event cannot be far off. Just quickly, I think re-emphasizing that's basically where we are right now. We are at the point where that event for us is certainly not far off.
Yes, historical inflection points happen at specific instances of time, and one such instance was that in which Paine was writing, and other such instances are confronting us now.
Let's go to number 52, another short one. But the most powerful of all arguments is that nothing but independence, i.e., a continental form of government, can keep the peace of the continent and preserve it inviolate from civil wars. I dread the event of a reconciliation with Britain now, as it is more than probable that it will be followed by a revolt of somewhere or other, the consequences of which may be far more fatal than all the malice of Britain. What do you fellows think of that one? Because obviously, this is
he's projecting what ended up being a counterfactual, whereby America goes back under British rule, and then some section of America revolts apart from the rest of the continent, and immeasurable miseries are generated thereby. This did not happen because we did not stay under Britain, though of course we do know that a different sort of revolt did eventuate eventually.
Well, there's a part of that counterfactual is this idea that we have a historical moment. Paine really believes it, and then to elaborate on his belief, he's demonstrating sort of you can't just ignore historical inflection points. If you try to ignore it, if you try to reconcile with Britain, something similar to it will happen, and it will be far worse off for the people doing it. They missed the train, but it still came.
Yeah.
So this is I was struggling with what I thought about this when I was reading through it, because I still don't really know what my clear opinion on this is, or my clear reading, but I did find it very interesting.
The next one, we actually both selected bits from this, but your selection's a bit larger, so let's go to Common Sense 13, and I'll hand it back to you.
All right, so Paine writes, "A government of our own is our natural right, and when a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own in a cool, deliberate manner while we have it in our power, than to trust such an interesting event to time and chance. If we omit it now, some Massanello may hereafter arise, who, laying hold of popular disquietudes, may collect together the desperate and disconnected, and by assuming to themselves the power of government, may sweep away the liberties of the continent like a deluge. Should the government of America return again into the hands of Britain, the tottering situation of things will be a temptation for some desperate adventurer to try his fortune. And in such a case, what relief can Britain give? Ere she could hear the news, the fatal business might be done, and ourselves suffering like the wretched Britons under the oppression of the conqueror. Ye that oppose independence now, ye know not what ye do. Ye are opening the door to eternal tyranny by keeping vacant the seat of government. There are thousands and tens of thousands who would think it glorious to expel from the continent that barbarous and hellish power which hath stirred up the Indians and Negroes to destroy us. The cruelty hath a double guilt. It is dealing brutally by us and treacherously by them. So this is getting back to what Mr. Quinn was pointing out earlier. Paine seems to have a contradictory view of a constitution, but this also points out something that he sees to be precarious, something that was unique to the people here, which was the liberties that developed. So people have a very our people, I should say, have a very one-dimensional view of Enlightenment thinkers. But if you read Paine here, if you think that Paine, being the typical one-dimensional Enlightenment thinker, thinks that you can just have liberty without anything else, then this paragraph makes no sense. Why would he be afraid that such a fragile system of the people here could just be swept away by some demagogue? Rather, these liberties are developed over time, and then implicitly drawing back to the start of this, they're developed through virtuous people. So they're dependent on the people and the virtue of the people. It's a very fragile system and one that is very easy to break and sweep away. So this is something that I found I thought would be good for at least my soapbox. The liberties of the English, or the liberties of the Americans now, are peculiar to the people and the virtue. If you mess with one or the other, you will not get them, and it wouldn't make sense to have them still. They wouldn't be fit for purpose. And this is I would hope this would not fall on deaf ears for those that think that any concept of liberty is an Enlightenment idea. Surely the last few episodes that we've done should disabuse someone of such an idea.
Yeah, I view this passage as being more rhetoric than dialectic. He's essentially raising a specter with which to instill fear in people who might wish to reconcile with Britain, saying that, well, if you reconcile with Britain, something much worse will come along. I wouldn't say a Hitler could come along, because that is, of course, 200 years too early. But he's raising this prospect of a demagogue taking all of their rights away from them, and so therefore they should seize them in their own hands now. So it's more of a, I view it as more a rhetorical flourish than a serious argument, but there it is.
Sure. I'm not saying this is the primary argument, even, because what you said is very clearly why he is saying it. But I'm just asking the audience to consider, if you map on different views of liberty and people to Paine that he didn't actually hold, then this whole rhetorical flourish still doesn't make any sense. It gives away what he thinks about the people, the liberties, and the virtues.
All right, let's bring up Common Sense 14.
All right, hold on. There we go. All right, so Paine continues, or writes rather, I've never met with a man, either in England or America, who hath not confessed his opinion that a separation between the countries would take place one time or other. And there is no instance in which we have shown less judgment than in endeavoring to describe what we call the ripeness or fitness of the continent for independence. As all men allow the measure, and vary only in their opinion of the time, let us, in order to remove mistakes, take a general survey of things, and endeavor, if possible, to find out the very time. But I need not go far, the inquiry ceases at once, for the time hath found us. The general concurrence, the glorious union of all things, proves the fact. 'Tis not in numbers, but in unity, that our greatest strength lies. Yet our present numbers are sufficient to repel the force of all the world. The continent hath at this time the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven, and has just arrived at that pitch of strength. in which no single colony is able to support itself, but the whole, when united, is able to do anything. Our land force is more than sufficient, and as to naval affairs, we cannot be insensible that Britain would never suffer an American man of war to be built, while the continent remained in her hands. Wherefore, we should be no forwarder in 100 years hence in that branch than we are now. But the truth is, we should be less so, because the timber of the country is every day diminishing, and that which we will remain at last will be far off or difficult to procure. Were the continent crowded with inhabitants, her sufferings under the present circumstances would be intolerable. The more seaport towns we had, the more should we have both to defend and to lose. Our present numbers are so happily proportioned to our wants that no man need be idle. The diminution of trade affords an army, and the necessities of an army create a new trade. There's a lot here, and there were multiple things that went through my mind when I selected this. So, number one, the time has found us, the time is now. This is a very recurring idea for Paine. There are historical inflection points, and they are upon us. The second thing, he once again views the colonies as united. Here, very clearly, rhetorically, it's to bolster morale, talk about how the united colonies cannot be defeated and whatnot else. But as he's been talking about up until now, it wouldn't make sense for them to be united if they weren't the same people. It's not how societies and governments form, says Paine, at least implicitly for the most part. And then to finish it all off, we have something else that we haven't really talked about yet that's been very peculiar to America, and that we have much more, throughout most of our history at least, we had much more land than people. We had much more things to do than we had people to do them, and yet we realized that this was a good thing and did not try to flood the country with hundreds of millions of people to just do more things. This is, as we talk about it later, perhaps in future works, at least I would like to, this is something that really keeps the American idea of society going. This is what allows people to talk about an American capitalist system, is because there is a strict limit on the amount of people that can be here, and the amount of land, resources, and work available always exceeds the amount of people that we have. That's not the purpose of the country, but that is the economic arrangement we found ourselves in until very recently, perhaps within the last 4 decades or so. The idea that the country should, for its own benefit, try to max out economic statistics is something very foreign, especially to this last paragraph in Paine. So that was what I wanted to bring up here.
I commend you for your restraint in passing over in silence the bit of proto-Keynesianism there at the end.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on that.
All right, well, let's move on to Common Sense 15 then.
Sorry, one moment. There we go. All right. So this is on the subject of debts. I believe this might be after the ship charts, but I could be mistaken. Paine writes, "Debts we have none, and whatever we may contract on this account will serve as a glorious memento of our virtue. Can we but leave posterity with a settled form of government, an independent constitution of its own, the purchase at any price will be cheap. But to expend millions for the sake of getting a few vile acts repealed and routing the present ministry only is unworthy the charge, and is using posterity with the utmost cruelty, because it is leaving them the great work to do, and a debt upon their backs from which they derive no advantage. Such a thought's unworthy a man of honor, and is the true characteristic of a narrow heart and a piddling politician." So, if I could continue on my soapbox for a moment, securing the country is a price worth paying. That is not to say that it is economically better than otherwise, or whatnot else, but that is the consideration that you should have if you are an American talking about the American nation. If you have to incur debt to secure the country, then the debt is worth it. It's part of the virtue. It does say nothing of, once again, the economic coordination around it, the economic system, or whether it is good or bad economically, but that's not the point.
Yes,
So
there are higher concerns than economics, and taking an economic hit in the service of securing your posterity is a worthy thing to do. That being said, millennials and Zoomers, take heart. Your crippling student debts are but glorious mementos of your scholarship.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because I would have been much less funny.
All right, let's do common sense screenshot 16.
All right, so we have here the infant state of the colonies, as it is called, so far from being against, is an argument in favor of independence. We are sufficiently numerous, and were we more, so we might be less united. 'Tis a matter worthy of observation that the more a country is peopled, the smaller their armies are. In military numbers, the ancients far exceeded the moderns, and the reason is evident, for trade being the consequence of population, men became much too absorbed thereby to attend to anything else. Commerce diminishes the spirit both of patriotism and military defense, and history sufficiently informs us that the bravest achievements were always accomplished in the non-age of a nation. With the increase of commerce, England hath lost its spirit. The city of London, notwithstanding its numbers, submits to continued insults with the patience of a coward. The more men have to lose, the less willing are they to venture. The rich are in general slaves to fear, and submit to courtly power with the trembling duplicity of a spaniel. So I believe Mr. Quinn might be ready to point out a contradiction with an earlier part in the pamphlet. But something that's worth pointing out here is that you get an almost Spinglerian analysis by Paine here, that the greatest acts of a people are in the non-age of the people. Basically, the great acts of the people are when they are a culture and not a civilization. So this is once again, you can find this in other places that are not being popularized by potential geopolitical rivals in the modern era. It's amazing how much thought that you can find that we've glommed onto that was in our own history.
Nothing new under the sun. I will state that the point he makes here is correct at the time he made it, but it's somewhat idiosyncratic historically, because this idea that nations' armies get smaller as the nations become more populous was true in the 17th, 18th centuries, the era of what were called the cabinet wars, when small professional armies did the biddings of kings in their various wars. But it's a trend that would go into startling reverse just 10 years after he wrote this with the French Revolution and the levée en masse. You start getting these mass armies again, which would culminate in the gigantic armies of the Napoleonic Wars and then the World Wars. So he's making a point that is technologically idiosyncratic, but correct in its time. The other point that he makes, the more metaphysical point about the loss of a spirit of a nation, as nations come to be dominated by merchant types, he makes the example of the city of London. Its warrior spirit is thereby diminished.
Right, and he mentioned earlier in the pamphlet that America just wanted to be left alone to commerce. So it seems to be mildly contradictory there. Now, what comes to my mind is that the Americans, at least for the first century and a half, if not 2 centuries, maybe not that, but about the first century and a half or so, we did seem to construct an economic system that did not diminish our patriotism while still allowing us to pursue commerce.
An excellent book on this is Paul Johnson's Shopkeeper's Millennium, one which we may get to cover at some point in the future. But yeah.
Now let us proceed in this general section. We have Mr. Oberon Quinn's final screenshot, number 70.
Indeed. As to religion, I hold it to be the indispensable duty of government to protect all conscientious professors thereof, and I know of no other business which government hath to do therewith. Let a man throw aside that narrowness of soul, that selfishness of principle, that which niggards of all professions are so unwilling to part with, and he will at once be delivered of his fears on that head. Suspicion is the companion of mean souls, and the bane of all good society. For myself, I fully and conscientiously believe that it is the will of the Almighty that there should be a diversity of religious opinions among us. It affords a larger field for our Christian kindness. Were we all of one way of thinking, our religious dispositions would want for matter for probation. And on this liberal principle, I look on the various denominations among us to be like children of the same family, differing only in what is called their Christian names. So there's a lot going on here. Obviously, this is in one sense just a statement of what the settlement would be in the form of the First Amendment. This idea that the government does not interfere in the private religious practices of believing peoples. But on the other hand, he goes further than that and actually goes on to state that a diversity of religious opinions is a positive good, which in its own terms, certainly an arguable concept. I can see the merit in that. But obviously, it's also very easy to see how he stops one step short of disaster and of proclaiming that our diversity is our strength.
Right, and that's so I really wanted to talk about this as well when I read it. This is a line of thought that you can. I'm going to keep beating this drum whenever it comes up, I guess, but you can trace this back once again to the Levelers in the English Civil War. I have an article about that now, but it's not overly important. The thing to keep in mind is that there's a long-standing, at this point, English idea that the wars of religion could be avoided by the English peoples if a general tolerance of Christians only was allowed. And that is the main barrier, this idea of a confederation of Christians.
If you look at his rationale, the whole point of the whole point that diversity of religious opinion is good is because it affords a larger field for our Christian kindness. This tolerance that he's talking about is very specifically rooted in the context of different Christian peoples. It's not, at least as far as he says, generally applicable to all faiths all across the world, and it has to be understood in that context.
Right, and that's this is also where the original meaning of the First Amendment is something that I tend to view with a positive attitude. This idea that the states can establish their own religions. Each state basically can have its own religion should it want, or it can have tolerance. It is just the federal government, the highest level of the government in the United States, that will not force one group or another, or in the other way around, prohibit one group or force a religious tolerance within a state.
I also have to wonder how far he will extend that tolerance to those Christians of a Jesuitical and papistical character.
Right, but this is at the very least, there's a historical precedent for them having a state of their own in some capacity. This is I really like this sort of confederal attitude towards religious states. This idea that the church and state are not separated, but the federal government will not mandate or prohibit anything so long as it's within the bounds of the broader Christian confederation. This is a project that I'm very sad to have seen fallen in the
It's
in
also
our history.
Worth noting that he's writing this in Pennsylvania, which, as we discussed in Albion Seed, was Quaker territory and was by far the most religiously tolerant within Christian denominations of the colonies.
Right, exactly. So this is a very I think this is perhaps the thing I'm most interested in, just on a purely personal note, with something that we do not have now and has been corrupted. But it would solve a lot of needless infighting, I think, if we adopted a similar outlook. But it's neither here nor there. That's my opinion.
Well, it is here and there, because infighting is the last thing we can afford at this juncture. This is like when Paine was writing a historical inflection point, and we would do well to look to our forebears for a model on how to stop fighting with each other and actually address the larger concerns.
Absolutely. We've also adopted a very confederal model very deliberately amongst ourselves at the Old Glory Club as well. And I think it's worked very well so far.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to the end now. Let's look at Common Sense 17.
All right. So he continues, immediate necessity makes many things convenient, which if continued would grow into oppressions. Expedience and right are different things. When the calamities of America required a consultation, there was no method so ready, or at the time so proper, as to appoint persons from the several houses of assembly for that purpose, and the wisdom with which they have proceeded, hath preserved this continent from ruin. But as it is more than probable that we shall never be without a Congress, every well-wisher to good order must own that the mode for choosing members of that body deserves consideration. He goes on, so this is where he gets into parts that I don't really care about. This is something I
He
find
proposes
interesting.
a whole scheme for governing America, but it's important to point out that the Congress he's referring to here is the Continental Congress, not the United States Congress, which is yet to come into existence. And
Right.
That body was not uniform in how the various colonies chose their members.
Right, and this is I don't think this was included to bolster morale. I think this might have been Payne wanting to get better organization out of the war effort. But this is important for a few reasons. Number one, immediate necessity makes many things convenient, but those continue to grow into oppressions. This is a temptation that a lot of people in our sphere have, is to go for the immediately convenient solution rather than the ultimately correct solution. Something that has to be guarded against is that tendency. I feel like that's where a lot of people before us have gone wrong, and perhaps even ourselves have made minor errors doing this, myself included. But then the other thing that I find to be interesting is he has a very ancient idea of what this Congress is supposed to do. It's the wisdom of the assembled that's going to guide us forward, but almost as if we have our elders, our wise men that go forward to govern and guide us. It's this is an Anglo idea. It's a Presbyterian idea. Is something closest in Christianity. This idea of a council of the wise to guide all of us forward. Something that we will probably discuss more in the future, but this is it's an underlying line of thought that we don't really see in modern America, because those groups have been so thoroughly destroyed, the Anglos and the Presbyterians, at least in terms of political power.
Well, we have a duplicate actually with the religious discussion we just have. So actually, the last screenshot we had, we could actually conclude on Common Sense 19. And we can do our concluding thoughts, I think, on this one.
Right, and if I remember correctly, I think this was in like a postscript in a later edition, but I'm not entirely certain right now. But this is Payne. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, are to receive their portion of freedom from the events of a few months. The reflection is awful, and in this point of view, how trifling, how ridiculous do the little paltry cavillings of a few weak or interested men appear when weighed against the business of a world. So this is interesting wording once again. Payne really does not have this apprehension of America as an idea or something that anyone could become. It's a new world with a race of men with a destiny, basically, is what Payne is talking about. This is I feel like this is the most explicit as he gets without just saying the words, as he has a few times. This is the most explicit allusions he gets that the Americans are a nation or a people. They aren't just ideas. They have posterity, as we've been talking about. They have come from Europe. They are different from Europe. They have Anglo roots, but they are no longer Great Britain's subjects. And here we talk about a new world at hand, a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains. So this is something that I found to be a good place to end when I was making my screenshots.
Yeah, that says it all. That is the point. And reconciliationists BTFO'd.
Yes, well, this was certainly a worthwhile read. It's valuable to us to examine the actual writings of the men of the revolutionary time in particular, because often what they said is not what you're taught that they said. And there are many disagreements we might have with Thomas Paine, especially in some of his later writing, but each and every one of these people are part of our heritage, whether you like them or not, and have made important contributions to it. And that's the real point here, is that this is your heritage as an American, and having sort of ideological arguments over whether or not Thomas Paine is like based or cringe or something like that is very much missing the point.
Yes,
Would either of you gentlemen like to conclude with any statements?
yeah, it's critical to understand how these men understood themselves, as we see with Paine and as we saw in prior episodes. These guys understood themselves to be the beginning of a new thing. They conceived of America as a nation of specific people in a specific place, and not as some vague ideological conception for all of Paine's universalist rhetoric.
Right, and for my own personal ending here, when I put Common Sense on the book list, I was wondering if we would actually ever go over it, because it's our side has such an aversion to anything that even sounds like it is from the Enlightenment, which is very troublesome for people born Americans here in America, because that is a very important age of the country. It doesn't mean that it's perfect or it's unassailable. It doesn't mean you can't criticize it. But to write it off entirely, I think, is to give up a lot of our own heritage. So we've gone over Thomas Paine's Common Sense, perhaps one of the more radical Enlightenment thought books that you can go over. Hopefully, the people in the audience have a slightly softer view towards these people who oftentimes are our own heritage. That was one of the main goals that I was wanting to get out of it, and I'm pretty happy with what we were able to pull out of Common Sense.
Yeah, me too. I was very pleased with this one. So with that, let's get to the super chats. We've got first from let's see, Blaze UC6 or I don't know how to pronounce it. $5. He sent a super sticker of like a blue hippo running. Kind of looked like it was running like Sonic the Hedgehog. At least that's how I interpreted it. So post a blue sphere in chat if you like Sonic. Next we have Ski Bum 220 sends us $25. Thank you very much. If more colleges had book clubs of this caliber, our country would be in a much better spot than it currently is. Thanks for streaming these discussions. Salute. Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'm glad you're enjoying these discussions, and I'm glad to see that people are finding this a valuable look into our neglected history. And then we have Melon for $15. Salute to you, Mr. Melon. Pennsylvania mentioned. I think we mentioned Pennsylvania actually twice. So, yeah, Pennsylvania is definitely getting its due here. Then we've got Clark Van Meter 2676 for $10. He didn't leave a comment, but thank you for the contribution. And then finally, we got Paul Fahrenheit for $4.99, 3-hour stream on the ship charts now. Yes, well, I think you might actually be able to convince Clossington to do that.
Look, £35,000 for a 70-gun man of war is not a realistic assessment. You haven't taken into account cordage. You haven't taken into account the tar costs. It's just not realistic.
Yeah, if you go to the Internet, what is that archive thing? I just closed the tab, but Internet Archive or whatever. That's why I found a copy of Common Sense archive.org. Yeah, and it's in there. Just look at the PDF, and you can read the ship charts. See if you can convince Clossington to grab the right people and do that, because I think a lot of more people would watch that than you would think.
We know our audience and we despise them.
So yeah, that's all we've got here. Next week we're going to be reviewing The Search for Order by Robert Wiebe. This is actually a book in one of Harvard's curriculums, and I suggested this one because I had read it before, and I think it would make a nice appendix to The Frontier in American History from last week. It also happens that I've reviewed it on my blog before. It's a paid post, but there are free previews of all the paid posts. So if you go to my blog, charlemagne.substack.com, it's called Neoreactor, you can check out my review of The Search for Order and maybe prep for what we're going to talk about if you're interested in it. So yeah, I think both of you will enjoy this book. I know I went over some of it with Mr. Quinn after our stream last week, and he seemed to agree that it was a good pick. So, yeah. Anything to shill, gentlemen?
American Spirits on the Old Glory Club, the Old Glory Club Substack. Chapter House on the Old Glory Club YouTube channel, and Pony Express Radio, also on the Old Glory Club YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's right. I owe our editor an article for this Friday. I'm writing an article on actually Dave the Distributist's viral tweet that people got very upset about. So yeah, I have an article on our Substack out Friday. I'm also reviewing a book right now. Somehow, in the meantime, while we're also doing this, called "No More Napoleons: How Britain Managed Europe from Waterloo to World War One," published on July 22nd, 2025. So it hasn't even been out a month, or it's been out just a few days over a month, rather. I would like to invite Hitman, who's now rebranded to Beat of Britannia, to look at it with me, as well as Apostolic Majesty. And we'll probably have a stream on it, and I'll have a book review on it sometime in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, as long as we're doing shout-outs, Apostolic Majesty did a spectacular stream yesterday on Carlism, which I recommend everyone check out.
I agree. I really enjoyed it. I listened to it as well. Let me just double check if we have any more super chats, and we don't. Okay, so thank you for watching, everybody, and thank you for the super chats. And